Today we conclude a series of sermons across the last 4 Sundays on Jesus in the letter to the Hebrews. The first Sunday was Jesus greater than the angels, then greater than Moses, and then last Sunday, the great high priest, and finally, today, Jesus, one great sacrifice. There is a contrast between this passage and the one David read just a few moments ago, because that passage tells about all the different kinds of sacrifices that priests had to do in the Israelite period, and they had to repeat them. What the author of Hebrews is saying in contrast is that with this high priest, Jesus, there is only one sacrifice, once for all, and it covers everything. And he is the sacrifice. Listen to Hebrews chapter 9, verses 23 through 28. Thus it was necessary for the sketches of the heavenly things to be purified with these rites, but the heavenly things themselves need better sacrifices than these. For Christ did not enter a sanctuary made by human hands, a mere copy of the true one, but he entered into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. Nor was it to offer himself again and again as the high priest enters the holy place year after year with blood that is not his own, for then he would have had to suffer again and again since the foundation of the world. But as it is, he has appeared once for all at the end of the age to remove sin by the sacrifice of himself. And just as it is appointed for mortals to die once, and after that the judgment, so Christ, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time, not to deal with sin, but to save those who are eagerly waiting for him. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Stephen Hooks tells the story of Edmund Steinley, a Lutheran preacher, one of the most outstanding Manhattan preachers in the mid-20th century, who had a large radio audience. He was a scintillating and provocative preacher, the kind that preachers like to listen to, learn from, and quote. But one day, his sermons dipped perceptibly. Everyone noticed. The words and the phrases and the passion just weren't there. Privately, he told later that he was even questioning staying in the ministry. And then one day, he described to the congregation where he was preaching and to the radio audience what had happened. He said, last spring, many of you know that my wife died, and I went into a place of dark despair. I questioned my belief in God. I just didn't know if I could go on as a minister. He was right on the precipice of losing his faith when he said, I needed to have a conversation with God. And I expected God to speak to me in a booming voice in King James English, of course. But instead, what I heard was a gentle whisper, a gentle word of encouragement and hope. And all the voice said was, hang in there. You're going to be all right. Hang in there. You're going to be all right. Isn't that a great message for us in Advent as we approach Christmas, especially those of us who have lost loved ones, as I did this year. Or maybe you lost loved ones a few years ago and you still feel it. Or maybe you lost them at Christmas time and it's hard. How nice it is to hear a word of encouragement and hope like, hang in there, you're going to be all right. It's the word that the author of Hebrews kept trying to say to those early Christians who were persecuted, who were about to give up their faith. Hang in there. You're going to be all right. It's a word that we need to say to the world today, isn't it? And the world replies, well, why do you want to say that to us? Because there are still very terrible things happening everywhere, and just don't give us a stiff upper lip, a little bit of a pep talk, a little chatty, snappy, oh, everything's going to be all right. We don't want to hear that. Not anymore. The pain is too deep. Look at what's happening in our world. Look at the violence. Look what's happening to me and you, our marriages, our country. Why are these things happening? Come on, preacher, why? And while you're at it, by the way, why did Jesus have to die? Come on, we want to hear it now. Okay, take a breath, and I'll give it a try. Actually, there is no answer to the why question this side of eternity. Maybe you'll find it on the other side, but not here. And Harold Kushner tried to help us, Rabbi Kushner tried to help us understand that so many people misquote the name of his book and call it Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. But that's not what it's titled. It's titled When Bad Things Happen to Good People, and how you deal with them when they do, and how God is there with you when they do. But there's no answer to the why question, no. Not even with Jesus. I mean, why did Jesus have to die? There's not a real answer, particularly in the author of Hebrews' idea. In fact, Paul gets at it a little bit more, but no, the author of Hebrews says it's just a sacrifice for our sins. There's nothing here about Jesus paying some penalty. There's nothing here about Jesus being the second Adam who is overcoming the damage done by the first Adam, which brought us death. No, none of that. Author of Hebrews doesn't even deal with that. That's stuff Paul talks about. No. The author of Hebrews' central thought is that we all need a good cleansing. Our lives need cleansing. That's one of the main points in the letter to the Hebrews, if you read it very carefully. And, we go to Christmas parties and we clean up and we, go and put on our best festive sweaters or whatever. Some of you wear ugly sweaters, but, ugly Christmas sweaters. But, I went to a lot of Christmas parties this last 2 or 3 weeks, and people say, hey, Bill, you clean up really well. Well, that's what we do for parties. We clean up. But the author of Hebrews would say to us, there is no way you can ever clean up enough for God. That was the problem the Israelites had, the problem the Jews had. They couldn't ever even come into the presence of God because God was too awesome. It's the Almighty, it's the creator of the universe who is Lord over all nature and history. In our churches, we're way too chatty about it. We don't understand how incredible God really is. Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox churches understand that. You stand for those services, but you don't stand with your hands in your pockets. There's almost obeisance because you are in the presence of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. There is no way, said the author of Hebrews to his hearers, that you can ever clean up well enough for God on your own. God is awesome. And you should approach God with a little bit of humility. Last week, a few of us went up to one of the rooms to Skype with Morgan Roberts, former interim pastor here, is talking about a new book he has out. And some different people were asking questions, and they asked him about Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, Presbyterian minister there in Pittsburgh, who had the wonderful program for children for so many years. And he was a friend of Morgan's. In fact, lived just up the street in a condo. His studio wasn't very far away. Every once in a while, he'd drop by to visit with Morgan. And Morgan told us this story. He said, one day, two of his grandchildren were visiting, a 5-year-old Christopher and then a little girl also. And Fred Rogers just made his way to the front door and rang the doorbell. And Christopher pulled the door open and stared, because he had just seen him on television and couldn't imagine that's the real. He couldn't say a word. The girl went and hid under a chair. So here is a real example for a child of what it's like to see someone that creates a sense of awe. It's a cute little vignette, but tap into that feeling of inadequacy in the presence of someone really great, some profound person, and then up the ante about 1,000-fold when you come into the presence of the Almighty, which is what we do here every week, if we take seriously what we're doing. Oh, we put on our best clothes and our bright smile, but we know underneath all of that is, a feeling of being besmirched and the stain of the stuff we've done and left undone. And we are exposed, could we ever be in the presence of the Almighty? We're a little awestruck if we take it seriously. We should. Imagine for a moment that you're a devout Roman Catholic and your whole goal in life is to make it to the Vatican and stand in a line and meet the Pope. And you're making your way closer and closer. And as you stand in front of the head of the Roman Catholic Church, no words can come out of your mouth. You are so awestruck. And then there is a gentle priest with a gentle smile helping you out, has a card with your name on it, handing it to the Pope, and welcoming you into his presence. So we want to be welcomed into the presence of the Almighty, and there is also another priest with a gentle smile and a card with your name on it, and his name is Jesus Christ. He is that high priest that gets you and me entry into the Holy of Holies, as we said last week, who intercedes for us at the very right hand of God. But how does he get us entry? Well, not with sacrifices like those in the Old Testament that they had to keep doing over and over again. No, with one sacrifice. And it is himself. This is an astonishing thing in the history of religions. Go back to the story of Abraham and Isaac, what's called the Akedah, and read it from the Soncino Chumash, that Jewish commentary that helps you understand the real context and how startling the story actually is. You see, the startling thing is not Abraham's faith. That's a nice thing, but that's not the startling thing. The startling thing is that in that tradition, it was fine to sacrifice your son or daughter to save thousands of lives. It's the same tradition that was in the Aztec culture. Gods expected sacrifices, human sacrifices. But in this case, with the story of Abraham and Isaac, you see now that this God, for the first time in the history of all religions of the world, this God says, no, I don't want a human sacrifice. And no, in fact, I don't want you to provide a sacrifice at all. I'm going to provide the sacrifice. And it is this lamb in the thicket. And that was an astonishing story in its time. Fast forward to the New Testament. Now, not only does this God not want a sacrifice, not ask us for one, this God provides the sacrifice, and it is God's own Son. That's incredible. And it is a sacrifice that is once for all time. What began on the cross is perfected in heaven. It's once is enough, says the author of Hebrews. Don't need to keep doing it. And it covers everyone. an amazing sacrifice. Don't let anyone try to tell you that the death of one person saving others is primitive or naive, because we have soldiers who give their lives for the others and for our country, and that is a sacrifice. Consider for a moment Arlen Williams, a passenger on the Air Florida Flight 90 that crashed on takeoff on January 13, 1982, into a bridge there in D.C. and then on into the Potomac River. 74 passengers were killed instantly, but Arlen Williams was one of 6 passengers who survived the initial crash, and he began pulling the other 5 out, one at a time, out of the Potomac River until all of them were saved, but he drowned himself. Maybe his model was Jesus Christ. I want to suggest something for you this Christmas and this coming new year, and that is that you don't just give material gifts to each other, but you think of something you can give of yourself. Some love, some sacrifice, something for someone who is in need, someone you know. Think about it right now. One thing. I'm thinking about it for myself, and I'm going to do it, and I want you to do it with me. That's what we need to do at Christmas time. Not just exchange a bunch of presents, and these things will wear out. We'll lose interest in them, but give something of yourself. You don't have to do anything as dramatic of saving people out of the Potomac, but just do something. And when you do, you'll have to have some joy in it. Now, Presbyterians have a hard time with that, I know, so I'm going to encourage you to have some joy. I always have joy when I make the birthday calls. And it's really interesting, it's 2,700 calls a year, if you count the babies and the children. It is the best part of my day, because no matter how grumpy I feel, people who are celebrating birthdays are happy. So they always pick me up, and it's just great, Called a woman yesterday. I said, hello, her name. I said, this is Dr. Carl, senior minister at IPC, and I'm calling to wish you a happy birthday. Little pause. Wait, this isn't a recording? I said, no. Is that really you? I said, yeah. Wow, Dr. Carl, this is great. Thank you. I'm 81, and I am so happy to be alive. Well, good. I'm glad you are. And she says, you know what I woke up thinking? I woke up thinking I'm counting my blessings. And I said, well, that's great. And she said, I even thought about singing, Count Your Blessings One by One. Do you know that song, Dr. Carl? Yeah, I know. Well, you ought to sing it. I go, well, okay. And she said, have you ever heard the story about the little boy leaving church with his parents, and he started singing, Count Your Blessings One by One, but instead he sang it, Count Your Blessings Ton by Ton. I said, no, I've never heard that. Well, that's what you ought to do. And I said, well, I can tell you're doing it. And she said, yeah, I am. I'm really happy. It just perked me up. And that's what we really ought to do at Christmas time, isn't it? No matter how hard your year has been, just count your blessings, ton by ton. Why? Because of the one who was greater than angels, greater than Moses, the great high priest, and one great sacrifice for you and for me. That's worth counting your blessings, all by itself. To this one be all honor and blessing and glory and praise from this day forth and forevermore. God bless you all.